Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.
Welcome to all.
History is made of stories.
In this episode, we'll be talking about the players on the HRIS market and the relationships between them.
Consultants, publishers, integrators, rollout assistants, a la carte assistants, third-party maintenance.
The list is so long it can begin to feel like a labyrinth you'll never escape.
Especially since everyone has their own interests to consider, and the degree of independence market players have from one another can impact the dependency of HR professionals on their suppliers. So, HRIS and external players, what's the story?
We're talking about all of the service providers an HR department can turn to for HRIS projects.
So we can identify the specialists that come into play at each key phase in the HRIS project. There are players who offer pre-project advice in terms of what HR policies to apply, others who help you determine which HRIS structure will make those policies a reality, and last but not least, those who sell the solutions and integrate them.
So in short, you have 1. Consultants, who can advise you on anything from HR policy and the definition of functional needs to rollout assistance. 2. Publishers and integrators who provide solutions and integrate them. And 3. Those who manage the HRIS long-term with hosting, maintenance, and associated services.
Let's start at the beginning then. With consultants, there are both generalist and specialist consultants. Generalists offer all services tied to HRIS, while specialists focus either on the pre-project phase, spilling over into HRIS, or on HRIS with some spillover relating to HR policies.
The HRIS specialists generally cover everything from the roadmap to selection advice, specifications, call for tender, etc. They often also help with rollout by running design workshops for configuring applications, for example.
Then there are the people who create the HRIS. On the one hand, software publishers, and on the other, those who install and configure them to be in line with client specifications and get them operational. They're known as integrators.
Here too, they tend to spill over into the other's territory. Some publishers configure their own solutions, some impose certified integrators, and some IT companies who integrate HRIS also have solutions of their own to sell.
All three types of players, consultants, publishers, and integrators, can extend their reach up or down the value chain to broaden their horizons, which doesn't make it any easier for buyers to read the market.
Then you've got those who run HRIS. First, there are technical infrastructure suppliers who provide machines, hosting, security, etc. Then there are those who maintain the software. This is third-party maintenance. And finally, those who use the software as a means to externalize the workforce.
For example, an SaaS publisher who relies on a cloud subcontractor for hosting can provide services to cover everything from the software to maintenance.
And an externalization supplier can include a remote workforce, payroll specialists, for example, or a form of pre-project advice on how to interpret and configure the HRIS for a legal change, for example. They can cover almost every link in the value chain.
As in all situations when the advisors aren't the ones paying, you have to ask yourself two questions. First, how independent are they? Because when the doctor and the pharmacist are family or friends with one another, you're bound to come home with a bag full of medicine.
But lack of independence isn't always a sign of poor ethics in a consultant. Sometimes it's an unconscious bias linked to more experience on a certain product. It's practically impossible to be up to date on every solution on the market, which is constantly changing.
The second question, after independence, is about whether you prefer a generalist, who does it all but knows less about each step, or a specialist, who's a real expert on part of the process, but may lack a comprehensive understanding of the whole.
Understanding the different players' interests and their limits is an asset when you're buying. It's important to gain experience without becoming a specialist, to remain discerning, and to steer clear of naivete.
To recap, external players for HRIS projects are the consultants who help define and choose what you need, the publishers and integrators who provide the solution, and those who manage and maintain the chosen system. They can all cover varying portions of the value chain, which means you need to be clear on their independence or lack thereof and on whether you prefer a generalist or a specialist. Is that right?
Exactly right. Way to make a long story short. Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.